G'day Bomber fans, round 1 is under a couple of months away and the team is currently going through a grueling pre-season. Lots of boys putting their cases forward for a spot in the best 22. It's a very tough 22 to pick as well. I can't remember a time where there has been so many tough calls to make. Today I won't be making those calls myself, but I'll be using my gut feeling to try and understand what calls Scott and his team will be making for round 1. So rather than picking my personal best 22, I am trying to do what I think they would do, based off what I'm seeing at training, what some people seem to be saying, availability. This is just for round 1, by the way, not the full year. So here it is. Here is what I think the round 1 lineup will be. Very early still, so this will probably be very wrong. Also, guys, I've shouted them out in the description a few times, but I just want to give thanks to the Caddy Shack over on Twitter, or X. All the photos I use in these videos I get from them. So go give them a follow on Twitter at Charlie Dons or the Caddy Shack. It'll be in the description again, so go follow if you want some awesome pictures. Fullback line, super easy to predict. These 3 players, if fit, will play every game in 2024, even if form wavers a bit. They are all very important players to our team. In fact, you could argue they are our 3 most important defenders in a way. Sure, Redmond is in many eyes a better player than McGrath, but McGrath is just about the only backman in this 22 capable of locking down a smaller forward. He did a number on Charlie Cameron last year, so we kind of need him fit and firing in 2024. The difference between him and the next best option, which I guess is Kelly or Hind, is quite a leap. And Mackay and Ridley, they're there. They kind of have to be. They are 2 of our most important players this year. Can't really argue either of them to stay out of the first team without looking a bit silly. So we're just going to move on to the next line. Halfback, this is where it gets really interesting. Mason Redmond's an easy lock. At the start of the year, I said there were 5 locks in our back 6 with the 6th spot up for grabs. Redmond was one of the bigger ones because of his last few years. He was he was in the All-Australian squad of 44 last year. But now things have changed a bit elsewhere. Laverty and Reid, picking who plays between them is really tough because I don't think there is room for both. You can't just push out Ridley or Mackay, and you can't play 4 key defenders. Sure, Laverty can play a bit smaller than what he is, but if you take out another player, you lose a great ball user. I think there is no room for Reid and Laverty if Mackay and Ridley are fit. I personally think Reid could be the better choice, but for round 1, I just get the feeling Laverty is probably Scott's choice for experience reasons, especially against Hawthorn, who have a similar sized Jack Gunston and even Mitch Lewis, who isn't too much bigger. I think you can argue more versatility with Laverty, who is a bit more mobile than Reid. For the first few rounds, I think Scott probably goes with Laverty just because he knows what he gets from him. And finally, in halfback, Nick Martin on halfback. We keep seeing it at training. I think it's more than just training for Martin and his defensive capabilities. It is a proper trial. We could well see him play there early. Many of us don't see the vision. I don't really yet, but I'm sure AFL coaches know more than us footy nuffies. You could get some seriously good ball use out of defence with him there, and it gives us room to play both Durham and Dersma in their preferred roles as well. So I think we could well see Martin on the flank. I think that's the intention here now, and from all accounts he is blending in nicely with the other backmen. Onto the midfield, this is fairly straightforward, you'd think. Merritt, our captain in the guts, obviously, don't need to say much more. Durham on one wing and Dersma on the other. I think we will struggle to find ways around playing Durham and Dersma and Martin in the same team, so the halfback move for Nick kind of frees up the others to play on their preferred wing. I like Dersma, I like Durham. We are seeing more of them in training as well, which is good. Durham we've seen all pre-season, but Dersma's only just come back into full training in the last week or so, and we're seeing more of him, which is great. I think with Martin on the back flank, it's an easy choice to understand who plays on the wing. We will go down the team lineup, so onto the forward line. This is where it gets interesting again. I think there is so much we still don't know about the forward line. We know Stringer, if fit, will share the midfield and forward loads. We know Gresham is going to be a huge part of our creativity going forward, but that second key forward spot after Wright, obviously Langford is more of a third key who can dominate smaller defenders, but whether Scott will choose Caddy or Jones, that is the question. Last week I would have said Jones. This week it's Caddy, though. He was the star of the match sim, was doing everything you could possibly be doing. Yeah, that big specky for the highlights reel. I think he edges Jones out right now. He just seems a bit more dynamic. It's getting to a stage now where Scott is probably struggling to think of reasons to keep him out of the side. So I have Nate Caddy making his debut in round 1, but next week Jones could impress and take over. I think it's just great that we have them both competing for spots. Whoever gets it would have earned it, and that isn't really something we can say about previous years. And also, just touching on Gresham, we've seen him push pretty high up the field when training. That is why I have him on a flank and not a pocket, and it means we can fit a role-playing small into the team as well. So at the start of the year, I wondered whether he would be that pure small, but I think we're going to see him play a bit like someone like Toby Greenwood, pushing into the midfield, using the ball-reading ability to help change play. I think we'll see that. All right, the last of the forwards, as I said, role-playing forward, whether it's Menzie or Guelphy is tough to say because both have been pretty solid this pre-season. I would say you would get experience with Guelphy, but Menzie played a full year last year and stood up, and I think we've seen a bit more out of Menzie recently. He was ahead of Guelphy last year, so I back him to be ahead this year as well. Peter Wright and Langford round out the forwards, so the forward line is a nice mix. You have sit-at-home keys, mobile keys, role players, and pressure providers. You have lots of depth. I think it's a pretty good forward line. I'd say the best one we've had since maybe 2017 when we had Daniher and Hooker and that Mosquito fleet, but we haven't really seen them play against a proper AFL team yet. Onto the centre, I was about to start talking about the bench because I forgot I skipped over this. I have Goldstein. I'm just not sure if Draper will be risked for round 1. I think he is maybe a couple of weeks away from integrating into main training, which probably means he won't be ready for the practice games. I don't know. I think the whole time we've been talking about getting players back to their best rather than just getting them back. Scott did it a lot last year, so I think it's there is every chance he's rested until 100% fit, and that probably might not be round 1. And the rest of the engine room, Parrish and Caldwell, kind of speaks for itself. We know that they're pretty much in our starting midfield. Onto the bench, Ben Hobbs, Archie Perkins, Nick Bryan, Dyson Heppel, and Will Setterfield, and the sub out of those 5 you'd think would be Heppel. I think Hobbs has to play full minutes. Bryan would start for that dual ruck setup that Scott wants to go with. You could make the argument for Nick Cox, I guess, for that as well, and also for some, I guess, versatility around the field, but I think he'll go with Bryan, personally, maybe, I don't know. Setterfield is that big body we need, but also someone who we saw drop back in defence at times. He is a good tank as well, so he can easily last a game. For me, it's weirdly between Heppel and Perkins for the sub. I think Gresham kind of has taken Perkins' spot in that forward line, and you can't really justify a forward 6 of Stringer, Perkins, and Gresham with Gresham playing as a high forward as he does. You need a pure forward, which is why I put Menzie there, but Heppel probably starts as the sub in this team, you would think. He's on the verge of missing out, to be honest. There are some good players missing. Elijah Santos, Nick Hind, Nick Cox, as I said, Harry Jones, Guelphy, Kelly, Baldwin, Davey. You got Shield, who's injured as well, and Draper, who I spoke of earlier. Alright, so the full team, I think it's pretty strong, especially if you compare it with Hawthorn. I think their defence would really struggle to contain Peter Wright and co. Sicily is great, but he isn't that one-on-one defender. Wright would get the upper hand on a Blank or Frost. Caddy and Langford would keep Sicily busy. Hopefully, you got some really dangerous midfielders as well. I think the main issue is the grunt. They are a stronger midfield physically, which makes Setterfield a big inclusion. That big body to negate the Newcombs and Nashes of the side. Obviously, Day could be injured, which helps our case and our backline. I think it's solid, the backline. The main worry for me is the unknown, whether or not this Martin experiment will help or hinder the team. But I think it's worth a shot. I wonder if Scott will throw in a curveball like a Jake Kelly or a Nick Hind, because realistically, our VFL team that weekend is going to be stacked. You could have some real talent through it because of our availability and general impressiveness as a squad. There are plenty of question marks, which, as I said earlier, is great. Laverty or Reed or Cox even. What happens with Nick Martin? And if he starts on the wing, what happens with Dersma? Will Draper be fit? Who will start out of Jones and Caddy? I think last year I didn't have this much difficulty predicting our 22, so it's good. A lot of problems to have on our hands. Scott has difficult decisions to make that could shape the course of our season. Let me know what you think down below, though. I guess we have what should be a poor opposition to face in round 1, which gives us the luxury of picking a team that we want to pick and not naming players because of who we are facing. This team would look a lot different if we were to face a Brisbane or Carlton, perhaps. But that's all. Let me know what you think down below. Do you think Scott will do anything differently to how I did it? Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and as always, go Bombers.